It was just a few days before Christmas in the tropical quagmire known as Florida, and Paul Anderson was out on a drive down the Suncoast Parkway just north of Tampa. Paul was 44 years old, and his life to that point had been defined by brotherhood, leadership, and life on the highway. He was no stranger to the road, or frankly, to violence. But when someone around him was taking a beating, he was usually the one doling it out. After a stint in the United States military, Anderson had risen in the ranks of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, widely thought to be the oldest biker gang in the world. When it came to one-percenter motorcycle clubs in the Sunshine State, the Outlaws were at the top of the food chain, and Paul was the president of the club's Cross Bayou chapter, giving him an extraordinary amount of power, influence, and respect in that world. Florida is a biker-friendly state, packed to the brim with highways, gas-powered engines, beaches, and a culture that values the coalescence of individualism and fellowship that the contemporary American biker has come to represent. But on this day, Paul Anderson was alone on the road, not atop a Harley, but in his pickup truck, and he was being followed by a pack of assassins who had determined that this would be his final day on Earth. It's unlikely that Paul knew of the impending threat to his life, but months earlier, he had been warned that he may soon meet a violent end. Police had gone to his home and told him that they knew what was going on amongst local biker gangs, and that a smaller club was looking to get even with the Outlaws. Paul had laughed in the face of danger and asked the cops to send his would-be killer a message. Tell him good luck. But now, bad luck had come Paul's way in the form of a red light. It was still daytime on December 21st, 2017, when Paul exited the Suncoast Parkway and pulled to a stop by a toll booth near Route 54. With his engine idling, the assassins struck. Two motorcycles pulled up alongside him, their riders noticeably not donning the distinctive patches that motorcycle clubs wear on their backs to let the world know who they are. On Paul's right side, a gunman fired 6 times into the car, killing him almost instantly, then sped away just as quickly. By the time cops and paramedics got there, the killers were gone. But they wouldn't stay hidden for long. As the mystery behind the assassination was unraveled, it became clear that Paul Anderson appeared on the face of things to be very justified in his overconfidence that day. His killers were people who had attempted to model their life after guys like Paul. But they lacked the street sense, the numbers, and the guile to go toe-to-toe with a club like the Outlaws. And yet, they just pulled off a brazen gangland-style assassination in broad daylight, in a state that prides itself on enforcing the law. Cops, media, and bikers all accurately guessed that members of another biker club had done Paul Anderson in. It was a club that rides under the symbol of a somewhat cartoonish-looking wolf, an animal that hunts in packs. This budding brotherhood of bikers, known as the 69ers, was attempting to gain a footing in parts of Florida they'd nicknamed Killsborough, Warlando, and Shots-Cola. But on this day, they failed to consider 2 things: the massive reach of Big Brother government surveillance, and the fact that within their own ranks was a so-called brother who had already agreed to work with the ATF. This man rode with the 69ers, but had been secretly recording their words while egging them towards self-incrimination. As things unfolded, this informant had unwittingly become the impetus behind the murder of Paul Anderson and the subsequent unraveling of the 69ers of Killsborough, Florida. This is the Killer Chronicles. Some biker clubs don't need an introduction. This aphorism doesn't really apply to the 69ers. The club has largely stayed off the radar of both the media and law enforcement until all hell rained down on them during the course of this story we're about to unfold. So, here are the basics. The 69ers started in Brooklyn, New York City, which to this day is known as the club's mother chapter. Some say it branched off from the Hells Angels, but whether or not that's true, the 69ers never really gained the same type of notoriety or membership as some of the more well-known clubs in the motorcycle gang war. Structurally, they rely on a constitution that requires new chapters to form an LLC or nonprofit, pay dues, attend church meetings, and value their patch like they do their own skin. All of these tenets are fairly standard for one-percenter clubs, which generally rely on a paramilitary-like structure, a strong sense of loyalty, a disdain for infighting, and philosophies about how to do battle with one's foes that evoke the likes of Sun Tzu. For instance, a handwritten 69er constitution we obtained notes things like, quote, "You must know your enemy better than you know your friends. Your life and the life of your brother may depend on it. Be prepared for war at all times." People who wish to join typically have to go through a theoretically long probation period, obey the house rules, and basically do all of the manual labor and cleaning while their loyalty is tested. The idea behind this being that members are forced to go through some kind of trial by fire in order to earn their patch, the symbol of the club displayed on the back of leather vests. They'll be more likely to respect the value of said symbol during times of stress or crisis. As one-percenter clubs are known to do, the 69ers began to slowly expand outside the realm of their mother chapter, to nearby Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Connecticut, but also to the further reaches of Puerto Rico and eventually Florida. In the late 2010s, the public was told a version of the 69ers' Floridian expansion that sounded like a barbarian invasion. Modern-day warriors swarming into a new land intent on making war through barroom brawls and shootings, and conquering turf with the intimidating savvy of Viking warriors on horseback. But here's a description of what happened that's more rooted in reality. Yes, the 69ers started a chapter in the Tampa Bay area. And yes, they called it Killsborough. At this time, they already had a clubhouse in Orlando that was more like a mansion, where dozens of members were known to hang out and coordinate efforts on whatever was going on at that particular time. The Killsborough chapter was hardly as glamorous. It started with 3 members and eventually doubled in size to a whopping 6, who went by names like Dirty, Big Beefy, and Punkin. These guys held church meetings every week until they realized they had nothing really to discuss. Its, quote, clubhouse was actually the president's garage of a home where he lived with 2 roommates. The garage was modified into a bar at the request of a 69er member who they'd later find out had been working for the ATF and wanted a good place to plant a bug so he could better incriminate his good friends. As such, up until 2017, the Killsborough chapter of the 69ers was more defined by its failures than its successes, and the 69ers' leadership appeared to be highly stressed at the idea of a looming war with the Outlaws that his club seemed so sure to lose. The pending beef had largely to do with 2 members, a regional 69er boss named Arthur Serrano, and a one-time Outlaws club member named Isaac Diaz. Arthur Serrano ran a trucking company which he used to ship meth and cocaine from Los Angeles, via Tijuana, to New Jersey and eventually Orlando. As a regional president, Arthur oversaw the 69ers move down south to Florida in the second half of the 2010s. As an experienced one-percenter, the best way he saw to do this was with the blessing of the Outlaws. For you see, the Outlaws were the undisputed champs when it came to Florida biker gangs. The club's infamous history includes murder, mayhem, firebombings, torture, and numerous instances where firefighters were revealed to be Outlaws members. During the 70s and 80s, the Outlaws were suspects in dozens of murders, but they were so skilled at keeping witnesses from talking that they were largely able to avoid legal repercussions. In 1976, a group of outlaws wounded 3 Hillsborough deputies in a shootout, with only 1 Outlaws member taking a bullet. In 1995, the club had 6 chapters in Florida, and members were indicted for firebombings, buying a 15-year-old girl for one member's, quote, personal property, a murder for hire aimed at a police officer, and a murder that occurred in the 70s in North Carolina. In 1999, Outlaws leader Harry Taco Bowman became a most wanted FBI fugitive for 2 years, until he was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to life for running the Outlaws Florida gambit like a violent racketeering enterprise. So, Arthur Serrano had plenty of reason to not want an all-out conflict with the Outlaws, and attempted to do the smart thing. He met with the Outlaws, assuring them the 69ers weren't a branch of the Hells Angels, and came away from the meeting optimistic that things would work out between them. But then, an Outlaws chapter president named Isaac Diaz came to Arthur Serrano with a proposition. Isaac wanted to leave the Outlaws with his entire crew and, quote, patch over to the 69ers. This was a tantalizing offer, but there was also a good reason not to accept it. On the one hand, allowing a group of outlaws to ditch their club was sure to anger the Outlaws against the 69ers. But on the other hand, there was a chance that adding these men to their ranks could provide some figurative insurance policy to dissuade the Outlaws from seeking an all-out war. Arthur and the 69ers eventually accepted Isaac's offer, knowing full well that there was a better than 50-50 chance it would set some kind of conflict in motion. To deal with these stressful times, they would need a savvy, intelligent leader with the Machiavellian foresight and cunning to navigate the troubled waters that lay ahead. Instead, much to Arthur Serrano's dismay, they got Christopher Casamano, aka Dirty. Christopher Casamano could hardly be described as a Napoleonic strategist or a deep philosopher. Once during a police interview, he quickly admonished the interrogator to not use big words after the federal agent assured him he wasn't a, quote, adversary. When asked if he could read and write, he responded, "Yeah, I can't spell real good, some words I can't read." But one thing no one could take from Casamano's time as a 69ers president: he definitely wasn't a coward, even though he saw the danger that a war with the Outlaws clearly posed. Casamano's Killsborough crew was small, but the 69ers were about taking care of one another. This group consisted of Casamano's half-brother, Eric Robinson, who went by Big E, Alan Guinto, who went by Big Beefy, Sean Leonard, who used the nickname Phelps, and prospects like Cody Wessling, a firefighter who went by Little Savage. Then there was Michael Mencher, a man whose nickname has been frequently misstated as Pumpkin, but was actually Punkin. Behind his back, other 69ers referred to Mencher as the village idiot, and it was unclear whether he'd learned this until after they'd all allegedly set the stage to blame him for a heinous crime. Big Beefy's backstory included serving in Afghanistan, then seeking membership in a motorcycle club, as American veterans had been known to do since the Second World War. He'd first joined the Iron Order, but gravitated to the 69ers after becoming disenfranchised after seeing how a deceased Iron Order member was treated by his so-called brothers. Quote, "We planned a funeral months ahead of time. There was 120 brothers in the state of Florida, and only 6 people showed up to ride. But everybody showed up to the party." Big Beefy became the Killsborough treasurer. Another vet with an interesting backstory was Phelps, who was anointed the Killsborough vice president. Phelps had also served in the military, but his stint ended rather abruptly when he deliberately shot himself in the foot in an army gun range, then lied about it by claiming it had been an accident. Under investigation for making a false statement and misappropriation of a government bullet, Phelps was given an other-than-honorable discharge and started hanging out with the Outlaws, growing to respect one in particular named James Costa. But Phelps decided the Outlaws were too intense for him, and that the more laid-back 69ers were a better fit. All this may still have been lingering in the air on April 18th, 2017, when an establishment called the Local Brewing Company hosted a bike night in Palm Harbor, Florida. Attendees included Big Beefy, Phelps, and a 69er named Catfish, who were enjoying the food and drink when who would show up but the man himself, Paul Anderson, the Outlaws Bayou chapter president looking to throw his weight around. With a large posse around him, Paul zoned in on the 69ers and put his arm around Big Beefy in a half-bear hug. "You got this pretty fast," he said, referring to Big Beefy's new 69er member patch. It was a snide remark, intended to insult not just Big Beefy, but the entire 69ers club, implying they didn't do a thorough job vetting new members. Then he gave them an ultimatum: leave or die in your vests. Big Beefy and Phelps responded by zipping them up. Then the beatdown started. The two were hit with brass knuckles, batons, tasers, and disarmed of their concealed carry firearms. When they woke up in a daze, their 69ers vests were missing. Even though he went to the hospital that night, Phelps still had to call 69ers members as far away as Brooklyn and warn them that a major conflict with the Outlaws had just started. They were told that this issue would not be over until they were to put 2 outlaws in the hospital and have stolen 2 outlaw vests. Casamano was pissed, but he was determined to see this vengeance plot follow through, maybe even take it a step further. For Phelps, the incident at the local brewing company was just the start of his bad luck. He went ahead with his plans to start his own gun-selling business, but ended up in a sticky situation when he sold 18 guns and 5 silencers to an undercover ATF agent in New York, which prompted a raid of Phelps' business associate's address, where more guns and a pound of cocaine was found. With the memory of taking a beatdown literally days earlier still fresh in his mind, Phelps decided that the best call would be to become a government snitch and secretly record the crimes of other 69ers while being paid thousands of dollars by the federal government. Unfortunately for the 69ers, their members sized up Phelps' character somewhat differently. They believed he would be the perfect person to dispose of firearms that had been used in shootings during the war with the Outlaws. It all started on the night of July 25th, 2017, when a firefighter was shot off his bike. Only he wasn't just a firefighter. He was also James Costa, the Outlaws St. Petersburg chapter president who was ambushed and wounded, but not killed. Costa reported seeing a white van nearby, but that was the only clue. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Florida, the 69ers were working to dispose of a pistol. Big Beefy and Savage buried it together in Savage's yard. But later, Savage decided he didn't really want a hot gun on his property. So he gave it to Phelps, who turned over the rusty pistol to the ATF. That brings us to the night of December 21st, 2017. Casamano gathered up a group in what prosecutors would later compare to a wolfpack seeking its prey. The posse included Casamano, Mencher, Savage, Eric Robinson, and Big Beefy. But Casamano and Mencher were the only ones on motorcycles, which they modified before donning masks for this assignment. Casamano supposedly told them he wanted to find Paul Anderson and, quote, beat the shit out of him. But almost everyone that night had a gun. They caught up with Paul Anderson's pickup truck, trailing it down the Suncoast Parkway until he pulled up at a red light near a toll booth. Mencher and Casamano closed in. A gun was pulled. Shots were fired. When the police and EMTs got there, they found only a deceased Paul Anderson, his foot still planted on the brake. His subsequent funeral was a major event, one attended by outlaws, as well as surveilled by the police, who were working to avoid an all-out Floridian biker war. But this was a murder mystery that would be solved quickly. After all, the ATF was well aware of a brooding conflict between the 69ers and the Outlaws, and they had a confidential informant who had been recording conversations with the perpetrators of Paul Anderson's murder, almost minutes after it went down. Whose fucking ingenious operation planning was this? Phelps asked Mencher in one phone call. Take a wild guess, Mencher replied, referring to Dirty. I says to him, listen, bro, I don't mind doing things, but not in broad daylight, bro. You know what I'm saying? Well, at least you guys covered your faces and shit, Phelps said. Yeah, thank God, Mencher replied. But then did you hear what the cops said? The ATF are getting involved now. It's all over the news. Federal prosecutors quickly indicted Christopher Casamano, Eric Robinson, Michael Mencher, Alan Guinto, and Cody Wessling. Of the group, Guinto, Wessling, and of course Phelps all signed up to testify, along with Arthur Ciarano, who flipped due to drug-dealing legal problems of his own. Casamano and Mencher went to trial, where they would face their former brothers in a court of law. When it came to Cody Westling's time to testify, he said that Casamano was the man who shot and killed Paul Anderson, a story that was echoed by Big Beefy. Westling had this to say. "He told me that the reason why he did it was for Phelps, because he said that, I guess, Paul was threatening Phelps and Phelps's family. When it came time for Phelps to take the stand, he revealed that he had received more than $12,000 from the ATF for his work as an informant. As a final act of loyalty and brotherhood, Casamano and Mencher turned on each other in court. Mencher's lawyer told jurors repeatedly that Casamano was to blame for the murder. How Casamano had invited him there to play the role as the village idiot, so that there would be a scapegoat and a fall guy for Casamano to blame. Casamano didn't do much to dispel this theory. I was there, Casamano admitted, but I didn't pull the trigger. Naturally, U.S. District Judge Mary Scriven asked Casamano that if he didn't kill the victim, who did? Michael Mencher was Casamano's reply. With his attempt to blame his fellow 69er now part of the public record, Casamano had only one thing left to do. Sit there in silence while a judge informed them that they'd be spending the rest of their lives in prison. And that's exactly what he did.